Good morning and welcome to the September webinar for LEA Special Education Points of Contact. We will be getting started in just one moment. In the meantime, you can download a copy of today's slides from your handouts tool in your toolbar. Also, let's do a quick sound check before we begin. If you can hear me loud and clear, please type in your question chat box at this time that you are able to hear me. Again, we will start the webinar in just one moment. Doing a sound check, please type in your question chat box if you are able to hear me. Thank you. Good morning and welcome to the September webinar for LEA Special Education Points of Contact. I'm Annette Thacker-Bartlett and I am joined today by my colleagues from various divisions at OSSE. This webinar is a collaboration between the Division of Data Assessment and Research, the Division of Student Transportation, the Division of Systems and Supports K-12, and the Division of Teaching and Learning. Today's webinar is being recorded and a recording will be made available within 2 business days following the webinar. Thank you for joining us today. So today's agenda, we're going to start off with a fairly deep dive into the child count process for this year. As the LEA Special Education Point of Contact for your LEA, you have a lot of responsibility to ensure that the child count process goes smoothly this year. This will require close collaboration with your data manager, as well as everyone who modifies and finalizes IEPs and SEDS. It'll be a lot of teamwork required. If you are a campus level special education representative tuning in today, please keep in mind that today's presentation is geared towards LEA level special education points of contact. So that is the main person over the entire LEA for special education responsibilities. It's possible that if you are at a campus level role, you may be assisting the main point of contact in some of these duties and responsibilities, but we just want to remind you that if you are a campus level representative, you need to always reach out to your main central office or head LEA special education point of contact for further clarification on your roles. And I also want to let you know that in Appendix A, there are several slides in Appendix A that in the appendices that we will not be presenting on today, but we have put them there for your reference later in case you need further information on something. In particular, for the new points of contact, if there are certain things you're not familiar with, you may find more information and resources in the appendix to be helpful to provide more context for what we discussed today. Here's a list of the things that are in the appendix that we will not discuss directly today during the broadcast. But these are important things that you should know how to do as the special education point of contact. And also as a reminder, in particular, if you are a new special ed point of contact, you need to have access to all of these different data systems. If you do not have access to one of these data systems, please reach out to your OSSE data team liaison, and how to reach out to that person, how to find out who that person is who is assigned to your LEA to assist with getting access to data systems, that is in the appendix. I'm now going to turn the time over to Rita Larkins with the Division of Data Assessment and Research with the Data Management and Applications team. She is our resident child count expert, and she will tell you everything you need to know to prepare for child count for it to be smooth. And if you follow everything she tells you today, I can guarantee you will not have a big headache later this year when it comes to if you follow her tips to resolve errors ahead of time and really plan ahead, you will have a very smooth child count process this year. All right, Rita, take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you, Annette. So in preparing for the 2018-19 school year child count, I'll be reviewing some information about the child count process, giving you an overview of the process. We will review the timelines involved in child count for 2018, ways for you to prepare for child count, and most important, how to resolve common data errors as it relates to child count. Also, IEP amendment process for child count purposes. Sometimes that is required. We'll talk in greater detail about that and give you some additional resources on IEP amendments. Also, using the CLICK application to identify data errors for special education data errors, and also troubleshooting and support for child count. So let's get into it. First thing that most returning special ed POCs know, but the new folks, I want to make sure that you are aware that child count is a federally mandated activity that we must perform as part of annual reporting of services to students with special education and in the District of Columbia. So it's a required reporting, and what it says is that we have to certify, District of Columbia has to certify for all local education agencies the accuracy and reliability of the data to its state education agency, that's OSSI. So what does that mean? That means that the information that you are submitting must be accurate and reliable. Let's look at some of that information as it pertains to child count. So the overall accuracy of SEDS data, that's the data that comes from the Special Education Data Systems, SEDS or EasyIEP. It impacts funding for special education. All of the data that's reviewed for child count is provided via SEDS. So there's not a paper process, there's nothing on paper that you do. All of the data that's used for child count comes through SEDS. So you want to make sure that all your information in SEDS is accurate and up to date. If any of the student special education information is inaccurate, it must be corrected in the source system. And as we all know, SEDS is that source system for special education data for the District of Columbia. Student populations enrolled as of October 5th, those are the students that will count as part of child count. They must also have, not just be enrolled as of October 5th, but must also have a current IEP and current eligibility. We'll get into some of those nuances a little further in the presentation. Any student that requires an IEP amendment directly related to child count must be completed by November 16, 2018 at 5 o'clock p.m. I'll repeat that. IEP amendments must be completed no later than November 16, 2018 by 5 p.m. Now, there are some additional resources for IEP amendments, a training that we're offering this coming Friday, and we'll provide you some additional information about that as well. As we talk more about the student populations that are included in child count, you can see from the chart that's being displayed that the student's status as far as their IEP and eligibility, these are the things that are being reviewed. So if a student has a current IEP and a current eligibility, and they are receiving services under IDEA, they will be included in child count. The rest of the information on the chart basically is telling you which students are included as part of child count. An expired IEP but a current eligibility, the student will be included in child count. A current IEP but an expired eligibility, those students are also included. If you go down to the last two sections on this chart, if the student has an expired IEP and an expired eligibility, or no IEP in the system but a current eligibility, those students are not counted as part of child count. The 2018 child count timeline is currently displayed on your screen. September 19th, that is today's webinar training. So if you are attending today's training, you have met that first requirement on our timeline to complete the webinar training. The range of October 18th through November 19th, the LEA Special Ed POC will assess, review, and resolve. Let me repeat that. You will assess, review, and resolve all child count data anomalies. That means if IEP amendments need to be completed, or if any other information that is incorrect in the student's eligibility and IEP needs to be updated, those things will be done by November 19th. Next, on October 12th, the LEA signs the Enrollment Audit and Anomalies Acknowledgement Form within the Enrollment Audit application. That is not a form that we actually send to you. We have gotten a few calls about that. That is within the Enrollment Audit application. So that will be signed. By November 19th, the LEA will sign the Data Certification Form, again, within the Enrollment Audit application. By December 14th, the final Enrollment Audit and Child Count Acknowledgement Form will be signed by the LEA. Again, that is housed within the Enrollment Audit application. Some additional reminders for the 2018 child count about data accuracy. The expectation is that LEAs will review and update data in the respective source system, that is SEDS. If there are issues, LEAs are expected to submit OST tickets in a timely manner so that we can resolve them prior to the certification date. And with any additional certification timelines where there is an identified data discrepancy, LEAs must resolve the errors in a manner that complies with all IDEA procedural requirements. I'm going to pause in this section just to take a few questions from our audience. So we will be addressing many of your questions online. Just to restate the information about the enrollment audit, the final enrollment audit and child count acknowledgement form, that form is found within the enrollment audit application. If you are the enrollment audit POC, I believe that you have completed SLED training and you should have access to that information. And you can also log into SLED to see that information. Okay, let's now move on to talk about a few ways for you to prepare for child count in advance. The first item that we want to point out is that you can remove all students from your SEDS roster who no longer attend your LEA. You can work with the registrar to properly exit those students, or if an admin exit is required, that you would put in an OST ticket for those students. Ensure that the SEDS records are fully transferred for all students with disabilities enrolled at your LEA. If you are looking in SEDS and you see student records that are showing up with a white check mark and you know the student has an IEP, I would suggest that you work with your JAR liaison to make sure that the records are fully transferred in SEDS so that you can see their current status in SEDS. Also, train your case managers to spot common errors on IEPs, which we will talk about in just a little bit. Check the UDE, the Unified Data Errors Report, daily. And also update all IEPs that are set to expire this fall. Those are some ways for you to prepare in advance for child count. The next chart shows a child count summary of action. So I'm going to talk about some of these data types, give you some examples, and then talk about any required actions for those data types. So in the demographic area, the data type of demographic, the examples that we have shown are the name, date of birth, race, and ethnicity. Required action would be for you to review that information. If it is inaccurate, you must update demographic information in your student information system. So if you use eSchool Plus, Aspen, PowerSchool, SchoolForce, or any of the other student information systems on the market, that's what you need to go into to update demographic information. For special education information, disability, IEP date, educational environment, dedicated aid, you will have to go to the source system, which is SEDS or Easy IEP, to make those corrections. If they are accurate, no action is required. If not, you'll have to go into the system and make those updates. So let's look at some common child count data errors, anomalies, and how you go about resolving those issues. In the Unified Data Errors, it's a quick application. Special education errors and suggested resolution paths are provided. All LEA special ed POCs should have access to the UDE quick application. If for some very odd reason you do not, please reach out to your DAR liaison. They can assist you with getting the proper access.
And as a reminder, if you are a campus-level special education representative, you may not have access to CLIC or to this report. You should contact your main LEA special ed point of contact at your central office or whoever that person is for your whole LEA to see whether or not you're supposed to be having access and what your role should be in preparing for child count.
Okay. Another common error that happens for child count purposes and when searching for students in SEDS with disabilities, when filtering by special ed, it will not include students that have expired IEPs or students whose records have not fully transferred. So the suggestion is that you not use the special ed filter when you're doing searches for students. The special education level is incorrect. You should confirm the service start and end dates, make sure that they are correct and within the time frame of the IEP. Also, you want to confirm that the least restrictive environment percentage and checkboxes are appropriately marked. If you're new to SEDS, a thing that you should know is that SEDS does not automatically select the checkboxes for you. The user is required to do that, and that is an area that people often make mistakes by simply checking the incorrect box. The educational environment will be pulled from the most recent IEP in SEDS and displayed in SEDS. So if the educational environment is incorrect, it may require that you complete an IEP amendment to make that correction. The special education data error that the student has an expired IEP but an active eligibility. The suggested resolution for those types of issues are to hold an IEP meeting and to update and finalize the IEP in SEDS. For students that are active in SEDS but withdrawn in your SIS student information system, it is suggested that the LEA ensure that the appropriate exit code was used. And if that exit code was used, they should follow the procedures in SEDS to have the student administratively exited from their LEA roster. For more guidance on how to administratively exit a student from SEDS, please refer to Appendix B. Now, we included some general information and where you can find more information about removing students from your SEDS roster. As example, a student that has graduated.
It's in the appendix B.
In Appendix B. So we have provided those step-by-step instructions for you to remove students from your SEDS roster. Another common child count data error is that the student turned age 6 and the educational environment designated on the IEP is no longer appropriate for the child's age. So OSSI does account for those students that are turning age 6, 5 days prior to the November 17th certification. And those students will be excluded from the error pools based on that date of birth. Another common error that you may see is that specialized instruction and or missing services are on the finalized IEP. You should review the current IEP and confirm the hours are accurately reflected. Most times what we find is that you may have intended to put a 2019 date and the service actually ends sometime in 2018 or is already expired. So if any correction needs to be made, please complete and finalize an IEP amendment or hold an annual IEP meeting to review and update the student's eligibility or service hours, and importantly, the dates of service. Next, a student that has turned age 8 and is eligible under the category of developmental delay. If the student has reached age 8, the LEA should conduct a reevaluation to determine the appropriate disability category and finalize a new IEP. If the student's date of birth is inaccurate and they are not at the age of 8, the LEA needs to correct the student's demographic information in their SIS. Again, that's your Student Information System. The next special education data error that we'll talk about is the educational environment not appropriate based on the student's age. So the LEA should review the student's date of birth to make sure that that is accurate. If the age is not accurate, that needs to be corrected in the LEA SIS. If the age displayed is accurate, the LEA needs to select the appropriate age educational environment in SEDS, and you'll have to do that by completing an IEP amendment. Now, we provided some additional information for you on educational environments and the definitions. The least restrictive environment, educational environment, and special educational levels are different. LRE is used to describe the IDA requirement to educate children with their non-disabled peers to the maximum extent possible. So that is your LRE. The educational environment describes the environment in which the child is educated for the purposes of federal IDEA EdFact reporting. The special education level is a local funding is a local funding label, and that is based on the total number of service hours per week and includes dedicated aid, regardless of the environment in which the service is provided. And here are some examples at the bottom of that page to show you from level 1 to level 4 for the special education level. Next, we want to talk just a little bit about those amendments for child count purposes. And we talked about some of the common errors. Here are some of the top 3 common IEP amendments that are needed. Educational environment, where SEDS does not automatically change the LRE selection, which is a radio button, when services are updated on the IEP. So this must be done manually, and it's often an area that people make a mistake. So in our example, the percentage that is calculated is 7.27%. The category that is selected in this example is B. We can see that that is incorrect. 7.27 should reflect A. So this will require the user to complete an IEP amendment so that they can select the correct LRE category. IEP amendments for child count related changes can be done without holding an actual meeting, but you must have written agreement from the parent prior to amending the IEP without convening a team meeting. Now, I think it's important to mention, if the parent requests a meeting, the IEP team must convene a full meeting. For more information or additional training for IEP amendments, the IEP amendment process training, which is a webinar, will happen on September 21st. That's this Friday from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. If you have not registered, please visit the OSSI training registration site to register for that webinar. I'm going to take a pause in this section to address a few questions that have come through. So one of the questions that came in is that if you have a completed eligibility but the IEP has not yet been completed, will this be an error and will the student be counted for child count purposes? So let's take the first part of that. If the eligibility has been completed but you have not yet done an IEP, we would suggest that you speed up the timeline to complete the IEP if the intent is to have that student counted for child count and you expect to get funding for that student. Remember, the IEP must also be in place for child count purposes. Another question that we have is that people are not able to access the handouts. We will email that information out at the conclusion of today's webinar.
If you are still having trouble downloading the handouts for today, the slide deck, several participants have commented that they were able to download the handout. If you look right above your chat box or right below your microphone icon, there is a box on your toolbar that can be expanded to allow for the handout downloads. We will still email them out following the webinar today, just in case you still aren't able to access them. Several of you have put some very good questions in the chat box, and our team is working to answer those questions individually in the chat box. And at this time, we're going to move on to Rita showing you the Click app of the Unified Data Errors. And after that, we will transition to hearing from our monitoring compliance team and our policy team and our transportation team, who all have important announcements and information to share with us before the end of the webinar.
Okay. So what you're seeing now is a training stream in Click, and I just want to demonstrate some of the special ed errors that you will find in the Unified Data Errors in Click. So I'm opening that up now, and then you will see the available sheets once you go into the Unified Data Errors application. And you will go to the Special Education Data Errors. So when I click on Special Ed Data Errors, I can see the total number of unique students and the total number of special education errors. One thing that I want to point out right away is that the number of special ed errors may not be an exact match to the total number of unique students. As an example, you could have one student that has several errors. The next thing I want to show you, I believe that most people have gone through some level of training, but I just want to show you quickly how you can get to the different errors. So you can look at the errors on the left-hand side up in the top section of your screen where it says error information. So if I wanted to look at my students that were active in SEDS but not in the SIS, because I'm getting ready to request admin removals or what have you, I can click on the actual error, check the green checkbox, which locks it in. This will show me the total number of students that have that particular error. So I have a total of 152 students that are active in SEDS but are not in my student information system. And I believe that we have already discussed the steps that are necessary for you to remove that student in SEDS. If you want to drill into a specific student, you can come down in the list and you can see all of the USI and the student information. If I wanted to filter just to one of those students, I will click on USI. All of the different USIs for this error group appear in the list, and I can select one student, click the green check mark, and that will filter just that one student's information so that I can see info just on that one student. When I'm ready to go back to my full list, I just go to the top of the screen and I can clear those filters. So all of your errors are on the left-hand side. Let's select a different one. Insufficient amount of service hours. I'll select that error, check the green check mark. Over to your right, it gives you a suggested resolution. Please review the current finalized IEP and confirm the hours are accurately reflected. If any corrections need to be made, it says please, I believe the rest of that will be please complete an IEP amendment. Yes. If you hover over the suggested resolution, it will give you the full description of that suggested resolution. If you have additional questions about how to use the special education data errors in the UDE application, please do not hesitate to reach out to your DAR liaison for more information about that.
Great. Thank you for submitting all your questions. We are working on responding individually to some of your questions, and we are going to wrap up and move on to the next section. But before that, we do see a question about getting additional support for CLIC. If you are new to CLIC and need additional support in how to get access to or how to navigate CLIC, please reach out to your assigned DAR liaison. This is the staff member at OSSI from the data team who can work with you one-on-one to get support for data systems. If you do not know who your data team liaison is, there is a slide in the appendix with a link to a spreadsheet online that lists the data team liaison for every single LEA. Okay, and now we will move on to hear first from our special education policy team. Christy, are you on the line with us today? Or did you want to wrap up?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. We have one more, just a quick wrap up for child count, and then we will turn the time over to Christy.
Yeah, sorry. Just to summarize, we want to be sure that all students that you're expecting are going to be listed, are enrolled as of October 5th. So this is just a summary checklist for you as the LEA POC, special ed POC for child count. Ensure that you are working with your LEA data manager and enrollment staff to correct any student information system inaccuracies. You'll be reviewing your UDEs in CLIC on a daily basis and ensure your IEPs are accurate and up to date for educational environments, services, dedicated aid, and disability categories. And as always, if you have questions or if there are specific anomalies, please submit your questions in OSSI's support tool.
And if you are wondering how to access the support tool, please look in the appendix. If you're a new special ed point of contact and you do not yet have access to the OSSI support tool, please seek access to that as soon as possible by contacting your DAR liaison. That is the primary way to communicate with OSSI to resolve many things, and in particular, child count. Now, we're going to ask a couple quick poll questions at this time. So the first question that we want to ask So please take a moment to answer the poll question. We're not here to judge you. We're just here to know if you, to get a sense of where everybody's at right now. Is your LEA, or is everyone aware at your LEA that child count is happening and on board and ready to, or at least do you have a plan to disseminate this information with anyone who can assist in preparing for child count? Or are you, or not? Again, this is not a question to judge you, or this is not a question that will affect your compliance in any way. We just want to get a sense of where you're at so we know how to better support you. Okay, thank you for that. And then our next question is, sharing. When will your team review all IEPs for your LEA? So this pertains to preparing for child count. Do you already have a plan for when you're going to have everyone? It could just be you, if you're from an LEA with a small number of students with disabilities, or it could be several staff members working in coordination to review all IEPs to make sure that there are no obvious errors at this time for child count. We went over some of those very common errors just now. We just are interested to know and strongly suggest that you have a plan and a timeline in place to ensure your IEPs are accurate with regards to child count errors. All right, thank you. We are going to move on. And Christy, do we have you on the line?
Annette, this is Karen, and I'm going to be presenting these slides.
Oh, great. Welcome, Karen Morgan-Donaldson from the IDEA Compliance and Monitoring team here at OSSI. Karen will be presenting the next section to us. Go ahead, Karen.
Good morning, everyone. And if we could move to the next slide, please. I am going to be providing some updates and some reminders related to IDEA monitoring and compliance, as well as policy. So just backing up a bit, on August 30th, OSSI sent guidance to LEA leaders regarding all of our special education updates moving forward, specifically related to initial evaluation and secondary transition requirements. On September 18th, OSSI posted updated procedural safeguards notices on its website, and we have included the link where you can access that. In terms of monitoring specifically, on September 10th, all LEA special education leaders were sent guidance on some of the changes that the IDEA monitoring team will be implementing related to initial evaluation, reevaluation, and transition from C to B. So all three of those communications were sent out via email. If you did not receive that, please go ahead and reach out to me directly or Christy Weaver-Harris, and we can make sure that we get that communication to you. A couple updates. Results from child fine policy review. Some LEAs are required to submit updated child fine policies as well as documentation of child fine training by October 15th. All LEA SPED POCs should have received outreach from their IDEA monitor. If you did not, or if you have questions related to anything related to child fine policy, review, please reach out to your IDEA monitor. In addition, determination corrective action plans for LEAs that are required to submit a CAP related to the determination, those are due October 2nd. And again, you should have received a reminder from your IDEA monitor for that. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to your monitor. For upcoming monitoring activities, at the end of September or during the month of October, LEAs will be monitored on reevaluation for the time period of April 2018 to June 2018, as well as initial evaluation monitoring for fiscal year or federal fiscal year 2017. So that's the time period of July 1st, 2017 to June 30th, 2018. And again, if you have any questions related to anything on this slide, you can reach out to me directly or your IDEA monitor. And if we could go to the next slide, please.
Or Karen, just a quick question. On the bottom of this slide, the dates say 2017 to 2018. Is that meant to be updated to be 18 to 19, or are you just stating what already happened?
For the initial evaluation? Those dates are correct.
Okay, so you've concluded that portion, that cycle of monitoring.
No, we have not done that. We have not completed that monitoring yet. We will be monitoring for that time period.
From?
In the past.
Yeah. I see. I'm sorry. From the data from that time period, you will be looking at it.
Correct.
Great.
Yes. Thank you. Yes.
And we also have a quick question from the audience. How does someone find out who their IDEA monitoring contact is at OSSE?
That's a great question. They can reach out to me directly. And
great.
I'll give my email.
Yep, I'll put Karen's email in the chat box. If you do not know who your OSSE monitoring and compliance representative is, if you have not been in touch with them, please shoot Karen an email. And again, if you're a campus level person, that would not pertain to you. This is for the LEA level specialized points of contact. Okay, next slide. Go ahead, Karen. Karen? I think we lost Karen, but that's okay. I can present on this slide. So the Child Outcome Summary Data Collection, this pertains to those of you who serve 3 to 5-year-olds with IEPs in pre-K3 or pre-K4 grade level. If you are new to your role, you may not have heard of this before, but for those of you that have been around, this should be familiar to you, as nothing has changed from past years. This is information collected by the federal government that OSSE has to report to the federal government for 3 to 5-year-olds with IEPs. Child Outcome Summary Data Collection process. Right now is the season when we are collecting entry data for 3 to 5-year-olds to see where they're at, and then at the completion of their early childhood special education program, right before they move on to kindergarten, or right before they turn 6, or right before they exit a special education program, you would collect the same data to see if their outcomes have improved as a result of receiving IEP services. We are currently in the 90-day window by which you should be doing the Child Outcome Summary Data Collection for each student in your LEA who has just started with an IEP. If a student is in pre-K4 and they were with you last year in pre-K3 and you already collected this information, you do not need to do it again. You only do entry data collection once. It is not an annual thing. You do it once at the beginning of a student starting a special education program who is 3, 4, or 5 years old, and you do it once when they finish that early childhood special education program. If you need further training on this, because you are new to this, we have a variety of recorded webinars and resources that are available. Please reach out to Carlene Reed. Her email is on the screen. Please reach out to Carlene if this is new to you and you are the special ed point of contact for an LEA who serves 3 to 5-year-olds with disabilities. Now we're going to turn the time over to our transportation team for a few updates.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'll just go through the first two slides. I know we're short on time. So the new CRM updates, we should be announcing their name by September 21st, which is this upcoming Friday. So be on the lookout for the name of the new system. We have reached out to 5 LEAs to do like a pilot test with them. Those schools are KIPP, E.L. Haynes, Friendship, Democracy Prep, and we're already set with DCPS just to let them get a feel for the new system and things of that nature. And the reason why we selected these schools because many of them have multiple campuses, so they could just get used to the new working through the new system. So the training schedule we already set up with most of the schools. We'll be reaching out to them to set up more dates in October. And our anticipated deployment of the new system is for ESY next year. If you could go into the next slide for me. And I just want to give a comparison of the transportation requests that we submitted, that we received for the first weeks of school. And as you can see, the majority of our transportation requests that were received were for change in address, change in receiving schools, and new school year. The big one on here, new school year really isn't the issue, but the big one is change in address. And that's making sure that we have all the accurate information that we should have, that we speak about all the time when it comes to transportation requests. So in an interim, if your student doesn't have transportation right now, they're going through a transfer situation where they're switching LEAs and you don't see them in SEDS. We are able to assist with parent reimbursement and also LEA reimbursement. And if you have any other questions, the slides down at the bottom in here, you can take a look at. They do have that information in there. And if you want to reach out to our team at any time, our number is 202-576-5520 if you have any questions for the support team or any transportation related questions, okay? That'll be it for me today. And if you want to just go ahead and move on to the ending slides, Annette, you can.
Great, thank you, Doug. And we will now turn over the rest of the time, and we may go over time just a couple minutes, but this next section is very important as it is going to talk about the alternate assessment eligibility process. There is an updated timeline for this year. We did share this information very briefly back in August, but today we have Michael Craig from our assessment team here at OSSE on the line to go through the process with you as a reminder. And if you have additional questions after Michael is done presenting, you can definitely email him directly. You see his email on the slide right now. So Michael, I'll let you take the rest of the time as much as you need to go through these next couple slides, and then we'll wrap up. Hi, Michael. Can you hear us?
Yes. Good morning, everyone.
Oh, great. Great. Go ahead.
Perfect. So for the 18-19 school year, LEA alternate assessment POCs have already been granted access to the alternative assessment MSAA Quickbase application. So within this application, this is the same Quickbase application that was utilized last year. LEA POCs will be able to view their 2018-19 students that were determined eligible for MSAA last year, and then they will also be able to view the students that were found ineligible for the 17-18 school year. So in order for OSSE to review applicants for the 18-19 school year, they need to make sure that LEA should ensure that the IEP is current, that the IEP indicates alternate assessment, the DC alternate assessment decision documentation form is completed in SEDS, and all supporting documentation is also uploaded into SEDS, which will include any recent evaluations, progress reports, or anything of that nature. So again, for this year, for the 18-19 school year, students that were found eligible last year will automatically be determined eligible for this year. LEAs will not have to complete a new application packet or determine new eligibility determination for the alternate assessment will not need to be completed again this year. We can go to the next slide. So again, for this year, students that will be participating in the MSAA, if they were not already determined eligible for the 17-18 school year, new participants will include new third grade students, students newly enrolled to the district, and any new special education determination for students in grades 3 through 8 and 11, or any students, any high school students that have not participated last year. So if you have a 10th grader, they were in the 10th grade last year, but they are now in 11th grade, and your LEA believes that they will need to participate in the MSAA, then you will need to complete all of those steps that were on the previous slides. So again, just want to reiterate that students previously determined eligible for the 17-18 school year, which are visible in your Quickbase application, will automatically be determined eligible for the 18-19 school year. We can go to the next slide. So we just want to give you another view of the outline, the timeline. We shared this in last month's POC, but we want to reiterate it again, that the application is now open, the Quickbase application is now open, and LEAs now have the ability to upload and complete all supporting documentation in SEDS. This will run until October 19th. On October 19th, that is the cutoff deadline, and then OSSE will begin reviewing eligibility applications for those LEAs that have applied. That run from October 22nd through November 16th. On November 19th, OSSE will send all eligibility determinations to LEAs, and then from November 19th through January 11th, LEAs will have the opportunity to appeal any determinations made by OSSE. And on January 16th, all LEAs will receive their final determination for student participation in the MSAA. And lastly, the testing window for MSAA this year will take place from March 18th through May 3rd of 2019. And if you have any additional questions about the process for MSAA, please feel to reach out to me directly. It's michael.craig@dc.gov.
And here we have, thank you, Michael, so much. Again, any questions, please email michael.craig@dc.gov. And please be aware that these timelines are rapidly approaching, by which you need to have all of your alternate assessment eligibilities correct and updated in the current IEP for each student who is eligible for that. So that's another thing that you as a special ed POC, it is your job to be proactive and reach out to all of your staff members and make them aware of that timeline for determining eligibility, and make sure if there are students who will be new to this assessment this year, that all of the proper documentation is in place. And if students are returning to eligibility for another year in a row, make sure that it's all marked appropriately and accurately in the current IEP on file. Okay, so we're going to wrap up. Here's a slide that lets you know of upcoming trainings that relate to students with disabilities that your staff may be interested in. These are also advertised broadly in the LEA Look Forward as well as on the OSSE events calendar. Thank you for joining us today. Here is a list of people you can reach out to if you have follow-up questions that were not addressed during today's webinar. And we will make this recording available within 48 hours on the OSSE website in the same place where we have put the last 2 years worth of webinars. And we look forward to your participation in the October 17th monthly webinar. Thank you and have a great Wednesday.